Part 2. With a heart of furious fancies, whereof I am commander, with a burning spear and a horse of air, to the wilderness I wander. With a night of ghosts and shadows I summoned am to tourney, 10 leagues beyond the wide world's end, methinks it is no journey. Tom O'Bedlam. Chapter 8. The old year soured as pestilence poisoned the planets. The war gained momentum and grew from a distant affair of romantic raids and skirmishes in space to a holocaust in the making. It became evident that the last of the world wars was done, and the first of the solar wars had begun. The belligerents slowly massed men and material for the havoc. The outer satellites introduced universal conscription, and the inner planets perforce followed suit. Industries, trade, sciences, skills, and professions were drafted. Regulations and oppressions followed. The armies and navies requisitioned and commanded. Commerce obeyed, for this war, like all wars, was the shooting phase of a commercial struggle. But populations rebelled, and draft jaunting and labor jaunting became critical problems. Spy scares and invasion scares spread. The hysterical became informers and lynchers. An ominous foreboding paralyzed every home from Baffin Island to the Falklands. The dying year was enlivened only by the advent of the 4-mile circus. This was the popular nickname for the grotesque entourage of Geoffrey Formule of Ceres, a wealthy young buffoon from the largest of the asteroids. 4-Mile of Ceres was enormously rich. He was also enormously amusing. He was the classic bourgeois gentilhomme, the upstart nouveau riche of all time. His entourage was a cross between a country circus and the comic court of a Bulgarian kinglet, as witness this typical arrival in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Early in the morning, a lawyer, wearing the stovepipe hat of the legal clan, appeared with a list of campsites in his hand and a small fortune in his pocket. He settled on a 4-acre meadow facing Lake Michigan and rented it for an exorbitant fee. He was followed by a gang of surveyors from the Mason and Dixon clan. In 20 minutes, the surveyors had laid out a campsite, and the word had spread that the 4-mile circus was arriving. Locals from Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota came to watch the fun. 20 roustabouts jaunted in, each carrying a tent packed on his back. There was a mighty overture of bawled orders, shouts, curses, and the tortured scream of compressed air. 20 giant tents ballooned upward, their lac and latex surfaces gleaming as they dried in the winter sun. The spectators cheered. A 6-motor helicopter drifted down and hovered over a giant trampoline. Its belly opened and a cascade of furnishings came down. Servants, valets, chefs, and waiters jaunted in. They furnished and decorated the tents. The kitchens began smoking, and the odor of frying, broiling, and baking pervaded the camp. 4-Mile's private police were already on duty, patrolling the 4 acres, keeping the huge crowd of spectators back. Then, by plane, by car, by bus, by truck, by bike, and by jaunt came 4-Mile's entourage. Librarians and books, scientists and laboratories, philosophers, poets, athletes. Racks of swords and sabers were set up, and judo mats and a boxing ring. A 50-foot pool was sunk in the ground and filled by pump from the lake. An interesting altercation arose between 2 beefy athletes as to whether the pool should be warmed for swimming or frozen for skating. Musicians, actors, jugglers, and acrobats arrived. The uproar became deafening. A crew of mechanics melted a grease pit and began revving up 4-Mile's collection of vintage diesel harvesters. Last of all came the camp followers, wives, daughters, mistresses, whores, beggars, chiselers, and grafters. By mid-morning, the roar of the circus could be heard for 4 miles, hence the nickname. At noon, 4-Mile of Ceres arrived with a display of conspicuous transportation so outlandish that it had been known to make 7-year melancholies laugh. A giant amphibian thrummed up from the south and landed on the lake. An LST barge emerged from the plain and droned across the water to the shore. Its forward wall banged down into a drawbridge, and out came a 20th century staff car. Wonder piled on wonder for the delighted spectators, for the staff car drove a matter of 20 yards to the center of camp and then stopped. What can possibly come next? Bike? No. Roller skates? He'll come out on a pogo stick. 4 Mile capped their wildest speculations. The muzzle of a circus cannon thrust up from the staff car. There was the bang of a black powder explosion, and 4 Mile of Ceres was shot out of the cannon in a graceful arc to the very door of his tent, where he was caught in a net by 4 valets. The applause that greeted him could be heard for 6 miles. 4 Mile climbed onto his valet's shoulders and motioned for silence. Oh, God, it's going to make a speech. It? You mean he? Don't you? No, it can't be human. Friends, Romans, countrymen, 4 Mile began earnestly, lend me your ears. Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. Damn! 4 white doves shook themselves out of 4 Mile's sleeves and fluttered away. He regarded them with astonishment, then continued. Friends, greetings, salutations. Bonjour, bon ton, bon vivant, bon voyage, bon... What the hell? 4 Mile's pockets caught fire and rocketed forth Roman candles. He tried to put himself out. Streamers and confetti burst from him. Friends! Shut up! I'll get this speech straight. Quiet! Friends! 4 Mile looked down at himself in dismay. His clothes were melting away, revealing lurid scarlet underwear. Kleinman! He bellowed furiously. Kleinman! What's happened to your goddamn hypno training? A hairy head thrust out of the tent. You studied for this speech last night, 4 Mile? Damn right. For 2 hours I studied. Never took my head out of that hypno oven. Kleinman on prestigination. No, the hairy man bawled. How many times must I tell you? Prestigination is not speech making. It's magic. Dummkopf. You have the wrong hypnosis taken. The scarlet underwear began melting. 4 Mile toppled from the shoulders of his shaking valets and disappeared within his tent. There was a roar of laughter and cheering, and the 4 Mile circus ripped into high gear. The kitchen sizzled and smoked. There was a perpetuity of eating and drinking. The music never stopped. The vaudeville never ceased. Inside his tent, 4 Mile changed his clothes, changed his mind, changed again, undressed again, kicked his valets, and called for his tailor in a bastard tongue of French Mayfair and affectation. Halfway into a new suit, he recollected he had neglected to bathe. He slapped his tailor, ordered 10 gallons of scent to be decanted into the pool, and was stricken with poetic inspiration. He summoned his resident poet. Take this down, 4 Mile commanded. Le roi est mort. Wait, what rhymes to moon? June, his poet suggested. Croon, soon, dune, loon, noon, rune, tune, boon. I forgot my experiment, 4 Mile exclaimed. Dr. Bohun! Half naked, he rushed pell-mell into the laboratory where he blew himself and Dr. Bohun, his resident chemist, halfway across the tent. As the chemist attempted to raise himself from the floor, he found himself seized in a most painful and embarrassing stranglehold. Noguchi, 4 Mile shouted. Hi, Noguchi, I just invented a new judo hold. 4 Mile stood up, lifted the suffocating chemist, and jaunted to the judo mat where the little Japanese inspected the hold and shook his head. No, please, he hissed politely. Oof! Pressure on windpipe are not perpetually lethal. Oof! I show you, please. He seized the dazed chemist, whirled him, and deposited him on the mat in a position of perpetual self-strangulation. You observe, please. 4 Mile. But 4 Mile was in the library, bludgeoning his librarian over the head with blocs d'asexual lebon, 8 pounds 9 ounces. Because that unhappy man could produce no text on the manufacture of perpetual motion machines. He rushed to his physics laboratory where he destroyed an expensive chronometer to experiment with cogwheels, jaunted to the bandstand where he seized a baton and led the orchestra into confusion, put on skates and fell into the scented swimming pool, was hauled out swearing fulminiously at the lack of ice, and was heard to express a desire for solitude. I wish to commute with myself, 4 Mile said, kicking his valets in all directions. He was snoring before the last of them limped to the door and closed it behind him.